The sound of the echo of the steps filled the polished marble lobby while Darnell walked toward the elevator. He wore a flawless suit, adjusted perfectly to the high and athletic body. He carried a leather paste on one hand and the phone on the other, quickly responding to some emails before climbing to his apartment. It was a quiet night, and he just wanted to relax after a long day at work. As he approached the elevator, the door opened, revealing a middle-aged blonde woman wearing a designer coat and holding the collar of a small white dog. His eyes narrowed as soon as he saw him. The face became an expression of distrust. She left the elevator slowly, as if he was waiting for him to pass, but did not move enough to let him in. Do you live here?" she asked, her voice sounding more like an accusation than a question. Darnell stopped, trying to soothe the sudden approach. He kept the composure and answered calmly, "Yes, I live. Excuse me, I need to get the elevator." She didn't move. "What is your apartment number?" Her tone was cold, almost hostile. "I never saw you here." He let out a sigh, keeping patience. It was not the first time someone questioned his presence in a space where they assumed that he did not belong. "Look, I don't think you need to know that, but I've lived here for over a year." Her eyes analyzed him from top to bottom, fixing on his face as if looking for some lie. "Do you have an access card? You need one to use the elevator." Darnell raised his eyebrow, showing the access card that held in his hand. She looked at him with skepticism, but has not yet left the way. The dog began to bark, pulling the collar as she refused to move an inch. "It proves nothing. I could see you coming in with someone, borrowing a card. You don't look like the kind of person who can live here," he said without hesitation. Darnell's blood boiled, but he remained firm. "And what kind of person lives here exactly?" She hesitated, looking away quickly, but soon fell on it again with a touch of arrogance in the voice. "People who can pay. This is an exclusive building, you know. It's not anyone who has conditions." Darnell held the laughter of unbelief. I couldn't believe her boldness. "So, do you think I can't afford it here?" She crossed her arms, the dog now growling softly. "I'm just protecting the residents. You won't come in until you show me any proof you live here." Darnell took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. He knew exactly what was happening. She did not question him for concern for the safety of the building. She questioned him because she couldn't accept that a black man could live there, wearing that expensive suit and carrying that leather paste. "Look, I don't need to prove you anything. Now, excuse me." He stepped forward, but she blocked the way, positioning herself directly in front of the elevator. Darnell's gaze hardened. He was used to situations of prejudice, but that was crossing the limits. He could call the security guard, but wanted to deal with it in person. It would not be intimidated in the home itself. The woman looked at him, with challenge. She really thought she had the right to bar him. Little did she know what was coming. Chapter 2. The tension increases. The silence in the lobby was dense. The dog still growled, as if shared the hostility of the owner. Darnell looked at the woman in front of her, analyzing every detail. She refused to give in, keeping her pose arrogant and the chin erected, as if she had full authority over the building. "I already said I live here. I don't have to prove anything to you," repeated Darnell, keeping his tone firm. She snorted, rolling her eyes. "Ah, of course, so what is your name? I can confirm with the liquidator." Darnell felt a knot form in the stomach, but it was not of fear. It was anger. Anger at humiliation, wide prejudice. But he kept his calm. "Darnell Thompson, apartment 12B. She arched her eyebrows, surprised that he answered. "12B? Impossible. I know the residents of this floor. You're lying." He crossed his arms, keeping his posture firm. "And how are you so sure? Do you think you know everyone just because you live spying on the magical eye?" Her face turned red. "I don't spy anyone. I'm just taking care of the safety of the building. You have appeared out of nowhere, and I won't let you go up." Darnell shook his head, trying to contain frustration. He wanted to answer, wanted to confront her with all the indignation he felt. But I knew I needed to be intelligent. If it lifted the voice, it would be labeled as the aggressive black man. If he tried to force the passage, she would probably call the police. And he knew very well how these situations could end. "Look, I'm already tired of it," he said, massaging the temples. You are neither security nor liquidator. You have no authority to stop me." She crossed her arms even more strongly, as if she was rooting on the floor. "If you don't get out of here now, I'll call the police. Then we see who is telling the truth." Darnell felt his heart accelerate. Of course she would play this. Let her. It was always like this. She knew the power she had when she was calling the police, and he knew the risk she was running if that happened. But instead of giving in, he decided it was time to change the rules of the game. "You can call it. In fact, it does better. Call the liquidator, or the security of the building. Let's clarify everything now," he challenged, crossing his arms too. "I won't go anywhere." She hesitated, looking at him as if she didn't expect this answer. Clearly, he expected him to hold on to hear the threat of calling the police. Before she could answer, the elevator opened again, and two neighbors came out talking. They stopped abruptly to see the scene in the lobby. "Darnell, all right, man?" one of them said, waving familiarity. Darnell smiled. "All right, Steve. Just trying to get home." The woman looked at Darnell to her neighbors, visibly confused. Do you know him?" Steve looked at her as obvious. "Of course. He lives here for a while. Owner of 12B, remember? He even helped with the gym renovation." The woman's face paled. She looked at Darnell, then to Steve, clearly trying to process the information. "Owner of 12B?" Darnell held the laughter. "That's right. And from the 12th, 11C? Actually, I'm the owner of this whole building." The silence was sharp. She was paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing as if they looked for words that didn't come. The expression of arrogance lashes, giving way to deep embarrassment. Darnell approached, keeping his tone calm but firm. "So I'll ask again. Are you going to get out of my way, or do you prefer me to get the safety to escort you out of my building?" The woman was pale. There were no more excuses, no justifications. She moved slowly, paving the way while the dog still growled. Darnell passed her, triggering the elevator with her access card. Before the doors closed, he threw one last look. "And the next time I decide to play security, I suggest you check facts before exposing your racism." The door closed, leaving her standing in the lobby, still in shock. Darnell released a heavy sigh. It was exhausted, but also relieved. It was exhausting to face prejudices like this, but he would not allow him to make him feel an intruder in his own home. No more. When the elevator opened on the 12th floor, Darnell still felt the blood throbbing in the temples. Despite keeping calm, humiliation still burned inside. He took a deep breath before crossing the elegant corridor, whose walls were decorated with works of art, that he had chosen to add a modern touch to the building. After all, he was the owner, and was proud of every detail of that place. As soon as he entered the apartment, the silence enveloped him. The windows from the floor to the ceiling revealed the panoramic view of the lighted city at night. It was a sophisticated, minimalist, and cozy space. He dropped the paste over the couch and released the tie knot, trying to relax. But her words still echoed in her mind. "You don't look like the kind of person who can live here." Darnell went to the kitchen, took a glass of crystal, and filled with cold water, drinking from one sip. He thought how many times he had gone through similar situations. In restaurants, designer shops, even in the office, there was always someone who looked at him with that mixture of surprise and distrust. But being questioned in the house itself was a new level of insult. The touch of the cell phone took him from thoughts. He looked at the screen and saw Steve's name flashing. He answered immediately. "Speak, Steve. All good?" Darnell tried to sound casual, but his voice still carried a score of tension. "Dude, I just got down and found that woman still in the lobby." She was pale as a ghost. "What was that?" Steve asked, genuinely curiously. "Racism, pure and simple." Darnell didn't try to soften the truth. "She saw me and decided that I had no face of someone who would live here." Steve released a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry for that, Darnell. I never thought someone would be so blatant. If you need a witness, I'm here. Everyone knows that you are the owner of the building." "Thank you, Steve, but I don't know if I will take it ahead. I'm just tired of these situations." He leaned back on the kitchen counter, looking at the city's view, while trying to find meaning in that experience. "Look, I understand, but don't let it go. She deserves a lesson, at least not to repeat this with anyone else. Steve paused before continuing. By the way, I knew she's new here. He bought the apartment in the 8th floor a short time ago. Maybe that's why she didn't know who you were. Darnell laughed, but it wasn't a mood laugh. It's not about who I am. It's about what I am. If I were white, she wouldn't even flash. Steve was silent for a moment. Yeah, you're right. This is so wrong. Darnell ended the call soon after, thanking the support of the friend. I knew Steve was right. That could not have no answer. But instead of confronting her directly, he had a better idea. He went to the office, turned on the computer and started entering an email. He wrote a formal letter directed to all residents of the building. He explained that, as owner of the building, he valued for security and mutual respect among the residents. He stressed that discriminatory attitudes would not be tolerated, citing the episode without mentioning names, but making it clear that that behavior was unacceptable. He concluded informing that, as a owner of the building, he would closely follow the administration and encourage everyone to know each other better to avoid maltreatment future. Before clicking send, reread the text and smiled. It wasn't going to stroke at her level, but it wasn't going to leave cheap either. She would know that he was not intimidated, and most importantly, the entire building would know who he was. Not only as the unknown black guy in the lobby, but as the owner and neighbor who deserved the same respect as anyone there. By clicking send, he felt a weight out of his shoulders. It would not change her mindset, but at least it would show that it would not retreat in the face of prejudice, and that was a battle he was more than prepared to fight. The next morning, the entire building seemed to breathe a different air. Darnell's email had had an unexpected impact. Barely descended to the lobby, he was approached by Maria, the friendly receptionist. Lord Thompson, I wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday. His eyes were full of concern. I was in my break and I saw nothing, but I learned about it. If I were here, I would never have allowed it to be treated like this. Darnell smiled, genuinely touched by her concern. Don't worry, Maria, you are not to blame. I just hope everyone has understood the message. She nodded vehemently. For sure. Some residents came to comment on the email. They were shocked. I think no one expected this coming from someone here. Before he could answer, the elevator doors opened and Steve appeared carrying a coffee bag. Darnell, he waved, approaching with a warm smile. I need to thank you for the email. It was powerful. Seriously, everyone is talking about it. And look, it was a class of class and dignity. Darnell laughed. I thought it was the best way to deal with the situation. I didn't want to point fingers, but it wouldn't be silent either. Steve shook his head, agreeing. And it worked. Just a warning. Such an incident, woman. She was devastated. Looks like it hasn't left the apartment since yesterday. Darnell could not fail to feel a mix of emotions. Part of him thought it was fair that she faced the consequences of her actions, but another part, which always struggled with understanding and change, felt that there was a greater lesson to be learned. It was then that she appeared. He descended from the elevator with hesitant steps, his face pale and his eyes low, avoiding eye contact. It looked like a shadow of the arrogant woman from the night before. The dog was by his side, calmer this time. She stopped a few meters from Darnell, taking a deep breath before speaking. I need to talk to you. Steve looked at Darnell, worried, but he just waved his friend to let him deal with it. Maria discreetly returned to the reception counter, leaving them alone in the now empty lobby. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but her voice failed. She cleared her throat, trying to recompose herself. I read your email and I want to apologize. Darnell was silent, watching her. She continued, her voice hesitant. I grew up in a place where I didn't know many different people from me. And I think I never wondered what I learned. She hesitated, her hands shaking slightly. But it's no excuse. I was prejudiced, and I'm embarrassed. Darnell's gaze softened, but he didn't answer right away. Let her face her own discomfort. She continued with her voice embargoed. When I realized that you not only lived here, but you were the owner of the building, I felt a complete idiot. Not because you are the owner, but because I assumed that you did not belong to this place just because of your appearance. She finally looked up, her eyes teary. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to try to be a better person. If you are willing, I would like to learn. Darnell felt a tightness in his chest. That didn't erase what she did, but her regret seemed sincere. He thought at all times that he faced racism and how he rarely saw a real attempt at change. Maybe that was an opportunity for transformation. Breathing deep, he replied, accepting the error is the first step, but recognizing the impact it has. This is what really matters. She nodded, wiping a stubborn tear that escaped. I'm trying. If you can give me a chance, I would like to meet you. As a neighbor, not as a preconceived idea. Darnell observed the vulnerability on his face and knew that despite the pain caused, this was an opportunity to break a cycle. We can start like neighbors, and who knows over time as friends, but know that change is not easy. It is uncomfortable, painful, and requires constant effort. She nodded with determination. I'm willing to try. Darnell reached out. She held her, a simple but meaningful gesture. He knew this was just the beginning of a long and complex process. But I also knew that every step in the right direction told. As she walked away, he observed her with a sense of relief. There was still a long way ahead, but her choice of confronting her own prejudice was a small step towards a better future. Darnell smiled at himself. Not just a building owner, but an agent of change. Perhaps that incident had a greater purpose than he had imagined. The weekend has arrived, and Darnell decided to organize a meeting at the building's ballroom. A casual meeting for residents, with food, music, and the opportunity to create ties that surpass prejudice. He knew that, to transform the atmosphere of the building, he would need to promote dialogue and coexistence. As he settled the last appetizer trays, he saw the first guests arrive. Steve was the first to appear, carrying a cooler full of drinks. You really are a man of vision, Darnell. We never had a social meeting here. This will make history. Darnell laughed, patting his friend's back. Well, it's time to change some things around here, and the best way to do this is starting with a conversation. Gradually, more residents arrived. Some greeted Darnell warmly, while others still looked at him curiously, as if they were still processing the idea that he owned the building. But all were cordial, enjoying the relaxed mood and good food. Then she appeared. The woman who confronted him in the lobby, now without the dog, carrying a homemade pie. His face showed apprehension, but also determination. She looked around before approaching Darnell. I made an apple pie. I thought it would be a welcome gesture. Her voice was hesitant but sincere. Darnell accepted the platter, feeling the sweet aroma of the apples and cinnamon. Thanks. It's a good start. She smiled shyly. And I wanted to thank you for not exposing me directly in the email. You could have humiliated me, but you chose a different approach. It made me reflect. I didn't think to humiliate you would change something. But give the opportunity to think about your actions. Maybe that makes a difference, Darnell spoke honestly. He knew the power of a compassionate approach, even in the face of ignorance. They were silent for a moment, watching the other people laughing and talking. I realized how wrong it was, and I'm willing to learn. Not only about you, but about everything I ignored for so long. Darnell nodded. Education is the first step. Changing is not easy, but it is possible. And I'm willing to help if you are willing to listen. She smiled, a true smile that showed the vulnerability of someone ready to deconstruct and learn to be better. I accept. Thanks for the chance. Throughout the night, Darnell observed as she was getting closer to other residents, talking with genuine interest. He also noticed how the atmosphere of the building was changing, how invisible barriers began to undo. Later, as he looked at the bright city of the terrace, Steve approached again. You really made that happen, Darnell. I never thought I would see so many different people connecting here. Darnell shrugged, his eyes fixed on the city's lights. Everyone wants belonging, Steve. The problem is that some think they can only belong by excluding others. If we can change this mindset, we can change anything. Steve smiled. You're not just a building owner, you are a leader, man. Darnell laughed, but deep down I knew there was a real background. He didn't just want to manage a building. I wanted to build a community, a place where no one else was barred by skin color or outdated prejudices. While the night advanced and the laughs echoed through the ballroom, Darnell felt a weight out of his shoulders. The fight against racism would not end there, but that was a beginning, and he was ready to continue facing prejudice, not just with direct confrontations, but with education, dialogue, and compassion. Upon returning to his apartment, he looked again at the empty lobby, remembering the initial confrontation. He smiled as he realized how painful and revolting moment had created an opportunity for change. After all, it was not just about being accepted. It was about turning the environment around so that no one else had to prove its value simply because it exists. With this renewed conviction, Darnell closed the door, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for the whole community.